In a small, sleepy town called Maplewood, where everyone knew each other by name, there lived a curious and bright-eyed 12-year-old girl. Her world was simple, but filled with dreams that stretched far beyond the boundaries of her quiet neighborhood. She spent most of her days buried in books about airplanes, rockets, and everything related to flying. These weren't just ordinary storybooks. They were thick manuals with diagrams, technical terms, and step-by-step guides on how planes worked. To anyone else, these might have seemed boring or too complicated for a child her age, but not for her. Every page sparked excitement in her mind. Her father played a big role in this passion. He used to work as an airline mechanic before retiring early due to health issues. Now he spent his time fixing up small planes at a nearby airstrip. On weekends, she would tag along, watching him tinker with engines, tighten bolts, and explain what made those massive machines stay in the sky. Sometimes he'd quiz her on parts of the plane, things like flaps, rudders, and turbines, and she always answered correctly, even surprising him with details he hadn't taught her yet. One thing set her apart from other kids. While most children dreamed of becoming astronauts or superheroes, she wanted to understand how things flew. She didn't want to just ride in a plane. She wanted to know why it stayed up, how pilots controlled it, and what happened if something went wrong. This curiosity wasn't limited to books either. Back home, she'd often sit cross-legged on the floor, piecing together model airplanes from kits her dad brought back from the airstrip. Each completed model was proudly displayed on shelves in her room, almost like trophies. Despite her love for all things aviation, she was shy around people outside her family. At school, she preferred sitting quietly in class, listening more than talking. Teachers noticed her sharp memory and quick thinking, especially during science lessons, but she rarely raised her hand unless absolutely sure of her answer. Friends teased her sometimes, calling her the airplane nerd, but she didn't mind. If anything, it made her smile because deep down she knew they were right, and she was okay with that. Everything changed one sunny Saturday morning when her family decided to take a trip across the country to visit relatives. It wasn't their first time flying, so no one thought much of it. They packed their bags, said goodbye to the neighbors, and headed to the airport. As they waited in line to board Flight 782, she couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness. Flying had always fascinated her, but being inside a real passenger jet still felt surreal. When they finally boarded and found their seats near the wing, she pressed her face against the window, marveling at the sight of the massive engines humming softly below. Her dad leaned over and whispered, "See those turbines? That's what keeps us in the air." She nodded, soaking in every word. Little did anyone know, this routine flight was about to turn into something extraordinary, a moment that would test her courage, knowledge, and heart in ways she never imagined. For now, though, life seemed perfectly ordinary. A young girl with a dream bigger than herself, surrounded by the comfort of family and the thrill of adventure ahead. What nobody realized, not even her, was that destiny had already begun weaving its threads, preparing her for a role she was born to play. The flight had been smooth for the first hour, with the hum of the engines and the occasional chatter of passengers filling the cabin. The young girl sat by the window, her eyes glued to the vast expanse of clouds below. She liked how peaceful it felt up there, far away from the noise of the ground. Her father was seated beside her, flipping through a magazine, while her mother leaned back in her seat, trying to catch a nap. Everything seemed normal, almost too normal. Then, without warning, the plane shuddered violently. It was like a giant hand had grabbed hold of the aircraft and shook it. Drinks spilled, bags tumbled from overhead compartments, and cries of shock filled the air. For a moment, everyone froze, unsure of what was happening. Then came the smoke. Thick, gray tendrils that began creeping into the cabin. Panic erupted instantly. People started shouting, some clutching their armrests, others scrambling to put on their oxygen masks. The intercom crackled to life, and the pilot's voice broke through the chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are experiencing technical difficulties with both engines. The crew is working to resolve the issue. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for an emergency landing." The word emergency hit like a punch to the gut. Passengers exchanged terrified glances. A woman in the row ahead began sobbing uncontrollably, clutching her child to her chest. An elderly man whispered prayers under his breath. The once peaceful atmosphere was now thick with fear. Amidst the commotion, the young girl sat frozen in her seat, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Both engines? How could that be possible, and what did it mean for them? She remembered something her father had said once about planes. If one engine fails, the other can usually keep you going. But if both go down... He hadn't finished the sentence, but she knew what he meant. Without engines, a plane couldn't stay in the air forever. Her thoughts were interrupted when another violent jolt rocked the aircraft. This time, the lights flickered, and the oxygen masks dropped from above. Her mother quickly pulled hers down, helping her father do the same before securing her own. The girl followed suit, though her hands trembled as she adjusted the mask over her face. Her father reached out and held her hand tightly, his expression grim but reassuring. But as the seconds ticked by, the panic inside her grew harder to ignore. What if they couldn't fix the engines? What if this was it? The questions swirled in her head, threatening to overwhelm her. Then, suddenly, a memory surfaced. A lesson her father had given her during one of their weekends at the airstrip. He had explained how pilots sometimes attempt to restart failed engines using specific procedures, depending on the cause of the failure. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, dismissing it as just another piece of trivia. But now, those words came rushing back with startling clarity. She looked around the cabin, watching as flight attendants moved frantically between rows, trying to calm passengers. One of them passed by her seat, visibly shaken but doing her best to maintain composure. Summoning every ounce of courage she had, the girl unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice barely audible over the din. When the flight attendant didn't hear her, she tried again, louder this time. "Excuse me." The attendant turned, startled to see a child standing in the aisle. "Please return to your seat," she urged gently, her tone tinged with urgency. "It's not safe to be standing right now." "I think I can help," the girl said firmly, her voice steadier than she expected. The attendant frowned, clearly skeptical. "Help with what?" "The engines," the girl replied. "I know how they work. Maybe I can tell the pilots what to try." For a moment, the attendant simply stared at her, unsure of what to say. Finally, she nodded hesitantly. "Wait here." With that, she hurried toward the cockpit, leaving the girl standing alone in the aisle. Minutes felt like hours as she waited, the tension in the cabin growing heavier with each passing second looked. Passengers eyed her curiously, some whispering among themselves. Was this really happening? Could a 12-year-old actually do anything to save them? When the attendant returned, she gestured for the girl to follow her. Together they made their way to the front of the plane, where the co-pilot stepped out to meet them. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead, but he listened intently as the girl explained what she knew. Using simple terms, she described the steps her father had taught her: how to check fuel flow, reset certain systems, and attempt a manual restart. The co-pilot exchanged a glance with the attendant, then nodded. "All right," he said, his voice tight but determined. "Let's give it a shot." Back in the cockpit, the girl watched anxiously as the co-pilot worked the controls, following her instructions step by step. Ground control provided additional guidance, their voices calm but urgent over the radio. Seconds stretched into minutes, and just when hope began to fade, one of the engines roared back to life. The sudden sound sent a wave of relief through the cabin, followed by cheers and applause, but they weren't out of danger yet. The plane was still too high to land safely, and the remaining engines struggled to maintain altitude. Working together, the co-pilot and ground control plotted a course for the nearest runway. Meanwhile, the girl stayed close, offering suggestions whenever she could. Her knowledge, though limited, proved invaluable in keeping everyone focused and hopeful. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the plane touched down. Sparks flew as it skidded along the runway, but it came to a stop without further incident. As the doors opened and emergency crews rushed aboard, passengers erupted into applause, hugging each other and wiping away tears. Many approached the girl, thanking her profusely for her bravery and quick thinking. Some even called her a hero. Exhausted but relieved, she returned to her seat, where her parents embraced her tightly. Her father's eyes glistened with pride as he whispered, "You saved us today." She smiled weakly, still processing everything that had happened. She hadn't done it alone, but she knew she'd played a part, and that was enough. As the reality of the situation sank in, she realized something important. All those hours spent reading books and listening to her father's lessons hadn't been wasted. They had prepared her for this very moment. And though she didn't fully understand why fate had chosen her to step up, she was grateful for the chance to make a difference. By the time the young girl and her family stepped off the plane, the world outside was buzzing with activity. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft, their flashing lights painting the scene in red and blue hues. Passengers were being guided to safety, some still clutching their belongings while others simply stood there, dazed but alive. The air smelled faintly of burnt fuel, a stark reminder of how close they had come to disaster. For the girl, everything felt surreal. One moment she was sitting quietly in her seat, trying to process what had just happened, and the next, reporters were swarming the area, microphones thrust toward anyone willing to speak. A man in a suit approached her parents, asking if they could share their story. Her father politely declined, shielding her from the cameras as they made their way to a waiting bus that would take them to the terminal. Inside the airport, chaos greeted them once again. News of the emergency landing had spread like wildfire, and hundreds of people had gathered to catch a glimpse of the survivors. Someone shouted her name. How did they even know it? And soon, whispers rippled through the crowd. "That's her," someone said. "The girl who helped save the plane." Strangers began clapping, their faces lighting up with admiration. She ducked her head, feeling both proud and overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Her mother wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You're amazing," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We're so proud of you." Her father nodded in agreement, though his eyes betrayed a mix of pride and worry. He knew this kind of spotlight wasn't easy for her, especially since she had always been the quiet type. As they waited for clearance to leave the airport, phones started ringing non-stop. Friends, relatives, and even local news stations called to congratulate them or ask for interviews. At first, her parents handled the calls, deflecting questions about her role in the incident. But word traveled fast, and before long, social media exploded with posts about the 12-year-old hero who had saved Flight 782. Pictures of her boarding the plane earlier that day surfaced online, along with grainy footage of her speaking with the flight attendant mid-flight. Comments poured in, praising her bravery and quick thinking. By the time they reached home late that evening, reporters had already set up camp outside their house. Their small, modest neighborhood, usually peaceful and uneventful, now resembled a movie set. Camera crews lined the street, and curious neighbors peeked out of windows, eager to see what all the fuss was about. Her parents ushered her inside quickly, drawing the curtains to block out the glare of the cameras. Despite the noise outside, the house felt eerily quiet. The girl sat on the couch, staring at the television screen as news anchors replayed clips of the emergency landing. Each report included glowing descriptions of her actions, calling her remarkable, brave, and a true inspiration. Part of her wanted to believe it, but another part felt uneasy. Was she really a hero? Or had she just done what anyone else would have done if they'd known what she knew? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Her father opened it cautiously, revealing a uniformed officer standing on the porch. In his hands he held an official envelope stamped with the presidential seal. The sight sent a jolt through the room. Her mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, while her father took the envelope with trembling fingers. Is this real?" her mother stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. No one spoke as her father carefully opened the envelope and read aloud its contents. It was an invitation, a personal request from the President of the United States to meet with her within 24 hours. The letter praised her courage and emphasized the importance of honoring heroes who inspire the nation. Her knees went weak, and she sank back onto the couch, unable to process what she was hearing. The president? Meeting her? It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, not real life. Her parents exchanged looks of disbelief, their faces a mix of pride and shock. Outside, the reporters grew louder, sensing that something big had just happened. But inside, the four of them sat in stunned silence, trying to wrap their heads around the magnitude of it all. That night, sleep didn't come easily. The girl lay awake, staring at the ceiling as her mind raced with questions. Why had the president chosen to recognize her? What would she say when she met him? And more importantly, did she deserve such an honor? These thoughts swirled in her head until exhaustion finally pulled her into a restless slumber. The next morning brought no relief from the whirlwind. Reporters continued to camp outside, and phone calls flooded in from every direction. Schools, community groups, and even aviation organizations reached out, offering congratulations and invitations to speak. Her parents fielded most of the requests, knowing she needed time to adjust. But despite their efforts to shield her, the weight of her newfound fame pressed heavily on her shoulders. At school, things were different too. Classmates who had barely noticed her before now treated her like a celebrity. Some cheered her on, calling her a genius and a lifesaver, while others whispered behind her back, questioning whether she deserved all the attention. One boy even joked that she probably got lucky, which stung more than she cared to admit. She tried to brush it off, reminding herself that not everyone understood what had happened. Still, the doubts lingered, gnawing at her confidence. Amidst the chaos, her father found ways to ground her. "Remember why you did what you did," he told her one evening as they sat together in the garage, tinkering with a model airplane. "It wasn't for fame or recognition. You did it because it was the right thing to do." His words resonated deeply, helping her refocus on what truly mattered. As the hours ticked closer to her meeting with the president, excitement mixed with anxiety, she practiced what she might say, rehearsing answers to potential questions. Her mother helped her pick out clothes, insisting she look her best for such a monumental occasion. Meanwhile, her father kept reminding her to stay true to herself, to let her passion for aviation shine through, just like it always had. By the time the sun set that evening, the house buzzed with anticipation. Tomorrow, she would step into a world far removed from her quiet life in Maplewood. But as daunting as it seemed, she couldn't deny the spark of excitement flickering within her. This was her chance to show the world that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. And sometimes, they're just ordinary kids with extraordinary dreams. The morning of the big meeting arrived, and the house was alive with nervous energy. Her mother bustled around the kitchen, making breakfast no one seemed to have much appetite for. Her father paced back and forth, checking his watch every few minutes as if time might suddenly speed up or slow down without warning. The girl sat at the dining table, staring blankly at her plate, while trying to steady her breathing. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something huge, something she couldn't fully understand yet. "Eat something," her mother urged gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You'll need your strength today." She nodded, but only managed a few bites before pushing the food aside. How could anyone eat when their mind was racing with thoughts of what lay ahead? In just a few hours, she would be sitting face to face with the President of the United States, a person she'd only ever seen on TV or in history books. What would he say to her? Would he ask questions about the flight, about her life, or would he simply thank her and move on? Her father broke the silence. "Just remember who you are," he said firmly, his voice filled with both pride and reassurance. "You're not doing this because people expect you to be perfect. You're here because you did something brave, something that came from your heart." His words helped calm her nerves, if only a little. She took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was going through all this. To represent not just herself, but also every kid out there who dared to dream big. When the car pulled up to take them to the city, reporters swarmed around it like bees drawn to honey. Cameras flashed nonstop and voices shouted over each other, asking endless questions. "How does it feel to meet the president? What will you tell him? Do you think you're a hero? Her parents shielded her as best they could, guiding her into the vehicle quickly. Once inside, she sank into the seat, overwhelmed by the noise and attention. She wasn't used to being the center of so much focus, and it made her feel small, despite the enormity of what she had done. The drive to the capital felt surreal. Tall buildings loomed overhead, bustling streets teemed with people rushing to work, and the air buzzed with activity. It was nothing like Maplewood, where life moved at a slower pace. As they approached the White House, her heart began pounding harder. The iconic building stood tall and majestic, its white walls gleaming under the bright sunlight. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. A friendly staff member greeted them at the entrance and led them inside. The interior was even more impressive than she imagined. Grand halls adorned with portraits of past presidents, golden chandeliers hanging from high ceilings, and plush carpets lining the floors. Everything smelled faintly of polish and history. She tried to take it all in, but found herself distracted by the weight of the occasion. Finally, they were ushered into a large room where the president awaited them. He stood near a desk, smiling warmly as they entered. His presence was commanding yet approachable, and he extended a hand toward her immediately. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice kind and steady. "I've heard so much about what you did, and I wanted to personally express my gratitude." Her cheeks flushed red, and she stammered a quiet thank you in response. She hadn't expected such warmth from someone so important. He gestured for everyone to sit, and soon they were engaged in conversation. He asked about her family, her love for airplanes, and how she had known what to do during the emergency. She answered honestly, explaining how her father's lessons and her own curiosity had prepared her for the moment. At one point, the president leaned forward, his expression serious but encouraging. "You know," he began, "what you did wasn't just about saving lives. It was about showing us all the power of knowledge, determination, and courage. You remind us that heroes don't always wear capes. They can be ordinary people doing extraordinary things." Tears welled up in her eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, treating her not as a child, but as someone capable of making a real difference. The president went on to announce that she would receive special recognition at an upcoming ceremony, honoring everyday heroes. Additionally, she would become the youngest honorary member of the National Aviation Association, NLA, granting her access to training programs, scholarships, and opportunities to shadow professional pilots. Her parents exchanged glances, their faces glowing with pride. They had always believed in her potential, but hearing it affirmed by the leader of the country was something else entirely. After the meeting, they stepped outside to find the media waiting eagerly for updates. Reporters fired off questions, snapping photos as the president himself accompanied them to the door. He placed a hand on her shoulder and addressed the crowd. "This young lady is proof that greatness exists in all of us. Let her story inspire you to pursue your passions and never underestimate the impact one person can have." Cheers erupted, and the girl felt a mix of emotions: pride, disbelief, and a touch of fear. Was she really ready for this level of responsibility? Could she live up to the expectations now placed upon her? Back in the car, her mother hugged her tightly. "You handled that beautifully," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Her father added, "See, this is your moment. Embrace it." But as the excitement settled and the reality of the day sank in, doubts crept back in. She wondered if people would forget about her once the news cycle moved on. Would she still feel like the same girl who loved tinkering with model planes and reading technical manuals? Or had this experience changed her forever? That night, as she lay in bed, she replayed the events of the day in her mind. Meeting the president had been surreal, almost like stepping into a movie. But beneath the glamour and applause, she realized something important. None of it mattered unless she stayed true to herself. Her passion for aviation wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about understanding the world above the clouds and sharing that wonder with others. As sleep finally claimed her, she dreamed of flying. Not in a plane, but among the stars, free and unburdened. And for the first time since the flight, she felt a sense of peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she could face them as long as she kept looking toward the sky. The days following the meeting with the president were a whirlwind of emotions and activity. The young girl found herself caught in a storm of attention that she hadn't anticipated. Reporters camped outside her house, neighbors stopped her on the street to congratulate her, and strangers sent letters and gifts expressing their admiration. At school, things were no different. Classmates who had once barely noticed her now treated her like a celebrity, asking for autographs or selfies. During lunch breaks, some even started calling her the airplane hero, which made her cringe inwardly. But not all the attention was positive. One afternoon, as she scrolled through social media during a quiet moment at home, she stumbled upon a post that made her stomach drop. Someone had written an anonymous comment accusing her of seeking fame rather than genuinely helping during the emergency. The words stung more than she cared to admit. She closed the app quickly, trying to shake off the feeling of unease, but the doubt lingered. Was she really deserving of all this praise? Or was it possible that people were right? Had part of her wanted recognition when she stepped forward on the plane? That evening, after dinner, she retreated to her room, shutting the door behind her. Sitting cross-legged on the floor amidst her collection of model airplanes, she stared blankly at the wall, her mind heavy with conflicting thoughts. Her father knocked softly before entering, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He handed one to her and sat down beside her, his presence comforting without needing words. "You've been quiet today," he said gently, breaking the silence. "What's going on?" She hesitated, unsure if she should share what was bothering her. Finally, she blurted out, "Do you think I did the right thing? Like, am I really a hero? Or am I just lucky?" Her father didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a sip of his drink and looked at her thoughtfully. "You know," he began, "when I first started working on planes, there were plenty of times I doubted myself too. People would ask me questions about engines or repairs, and sometimes I'd wonder if I really knew enough to help them. But here's the thing. You don't have to be perfect to make a difference, you just have to try your best." He paused, setting his mug aside and leaning closer. "That day on the plane, you didn't step forward because you wanted applause or cameras in your face. You did it because you saw a problem and knew you might be able to help. That's what makes you special. Not the title people give you, but the fact that you acted when others froze." His words resonated deeply, though they didn't completely erase her doubts. Still, she felt a flicker of relief knowing that someone understood how she felt. Later that night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she realized something important. While she couldn't control what others thought or said about her, she could decide how she responded to it. And maybe, just maybe, she could use this platform to inspire others instead of letting negativity weigh her down. The next morning, she woke up with a new sense of purpose. If people were watching her now, why not show them what truly mattered to her? Over breakfast, she shared her idea with her parents. "I want to talk to kids," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. "Not just about planes, but about believing in themselves, about chasing their dreams, even if those dreams seem impossible." Her mother smiled warmly. "That's a wonderful idea," she said. "But are you sure you're ready for that? It won't always be easy." "I know," the girl replied. "But if I can help even one person feel brave enough to try something new, then it'll be worth it." Her parents exchanged proud glances and agreed to support her however they could. They reached out to local schools and community centers, arranging speaking engagements where she could share her story. At first, she was terrified of standing in front of crowds, especially since many of the students were older than her. But each time she spoke, she grew more confident, finding comfort in the familiar topics of aviation and curiosity. One of her earliest talks was at a middle school auditorium. As she walked onto the stage, the sea of faces staring back at her felt overwhelming. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. But then she remembered her father's advice. Focus on the message, not the audience. Taking a deep breath, she began. When I was younger, I loved reading books about airplanes, she started, her voice soft but clear. Some people thought it was weird for a kid my age to care so much about engines and turbines, but I didn't listen to them because it made me happy. And later, when we were on that plane, everything I'd learned helped me stay calm and figure out what to do. She went on to explain how small actions could lead to big changes, using her experience as an example. It doesn't matter if you're the smartest person in the room or the most experienced. What matters is that you're willing to try. Sometimes all it takes is one person stepping up to make a difference. By the end of her speech, the room erupted into applause. Students lined up afterward to ask questions, some sharing their own passions from robotics to painting, and thanking her for encouraging them to keep pursuing their interests. For the first time since the flight, she felt a genuine connection with others, not as a hero, but as someone who understood the value of perseverance and courage. As weeks turned into months, her confidence continued to grow. She traveled to nearby towns, speaking at events organized by aviation clubs and educational programs. Each talk reinforced her belief that everyone has the potential to achieve greatness, regardless of age or background. Along the way, she met countless inspiring individuals, young inventors, aspiring pilots, and curious minds eager to learn. Their enthusiasm fueled her determination to keep pushing forward. At home, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The reporters eventually moved on to other stories and the neighborhood quieted down. But the impact of her journey remained etched in her heart. She had faced fear, doubt, and criticism, yet emerged stronger and more focused than ever before. More importantly, she had discovered a purpose beyond herself, a desire to uplift others and remind them that heroes aren't born. They're made through hard work, kindness, and resilience. One evening, as she sat in her room assembling a new model airplane, her father peeked in. "You've come a long way," he said with a smile. "Proud of you," she grinned back, holding up the half-finished plane. "Thanks, Dad. But I'm not done yet. There's still so much more to do." And with that, she returned to her project, her mind already dreaming of the next adventure. Months had passed since the day she saved the plane, and life had settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. The young girl was no longer just the quiet kid who loved airplanes. She was now someone who inspired others with her story. Yet despite the accolades and attention, she remained grounded, literally and figuratively. Her passion for aviation hadn't waned. If anything, it had grown stronger. Every opportunity to speak at schools or events reinforced her belief that pursuing your dreams, no matter how big or small, could lead to incredible things. One crisp autumn morning, she received an invitation that took her breath away. It was from the National Aviation Association, NAA, the same organization that had named her an honorary member months earlier. They were hosting their annual award ceremony in Washington, D.C., and she had been chosen to deliver the closing speech. The letter explained that her words would serve as a call to action for young people everywhere, to chase their passions, embrace challenges, and never underestimate their potential. Her hands trembled as she read the letter aloud to her parents. "They want me to speak?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Of course they do," her mother replied, beaming with pride. "Who better than you? You've already shown the world what's possible." Her father nodded in agreement. "This is your chance to leave a lasting impression. Tell them what's in your heart." The thought of standing on such a prestigious stage filled her with equal parts excitement and anxiety. What could she possibly say to an audience of seasoned aviators, engineers, and industry leaders? These were people who had dedicated their lives to flight, while she was still figuring out her own path. But deep down, she knew this wasn't about comparing herself to others. It was about sharing her journey and encouraging others to find theirs. The day of the ceremony arrived, and the grand hall buzzed with energy. Hundreds of attendees filled the room, dressed in suits and uniforms, their conversations punctuated by laughter and applause. A massive screen displayed images of historic flights, iconic aircraft, and groundbreaking innovations. The girl sat nervously in the front row, fidgeting with the hem of her dress as she waited for her turn to speak. Her parents sat beside her, offering silent reassurance through warm smiles and gentle pats on the back. When her name was finally called, she rose slowly, her legs feeling like jelly beneath her. The spotlight hit her as she stepped onto the stage, and for a moment she froze, overwhelmed by the sea of faces staring back at her. Then she remembered her father's advice. Focus on the message, not the audience. Taking a deep breath, she approached the podium and adjusted the microphone. "Good evening," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today talking to all of you. When I was younger, my dream was simple. I wanted to understand how planes worked. I spent hours reading books, building models, and asking endless questions. Some people thought it was unusual for a kid my age to care so much about something so technical. But to me, it wasn't strange. It was exciting. Planes represented freedom, adventure, and the idea that we can rise above our limits if we dare to try." She paused, glancing at the crowd. Their eyes were fixed on her, hanging onto every word. Encouraged, she continued. "A few months ago, I found myself in a situation where everything I'd learned came together in a way I never expected. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I doubted myself, when fear almost stopped me from acting. But then I remembered something my dad once told me. Sometimes the things we're passionate about prepare us for moments we don't see coming. That day on the plane, I realized he was right. All those hours spent studying engines and learning procedures weren't wasted. They gave me the tools to help when it mattered most." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, her confidence building with each sentence. "But here's the thing," she added. "It's not just about planes or emergencies. It's about believing in yourself and trusting that your efforts will pay off, even if you can't see the outcome right away. Whether you're interested in flying, science, art, or anything else, don't let anyone tell you it's too hard or too late. Keep going, keep learning, and keep dreaming, because one day you might find yourself exactly where you're meant to be." The room erupted into applause, louder and more heartfelt than she had ever imagined. People stood, cheering and whistling, their admiration evident in every clap. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, smiling brightly as she stepped back from the podium. For the first time in her life, she truly felt like she belonged, not because of what she had done, but because of who she was becoming. After the ceremony, strangers approached her to shake her hand and thank her for her words. Some shared stories of their own struggles and triumphs, while others simply expressed gratitude for her courage and authenticity. Among the attendees was a retired astronaut who pulled her aside after the crowd thinned. "You remind me of myself, when I was your age," he said with a warm smile. "Back then, everyone thought I was crazy for wanting to go to space. But look where it got me." He handed her a small pin shaped like a rocket. "Keep reaching for the stars. You'll get there." She clutched the pin tightly, her heart swelling with emotion. It was a reminder that her journey was far from over, and that the sky was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, life returned to its usual pace, but the impact of the ceremony lingered. She threw herself into her studies, determined to learn as much as she could about aviation and beyond. Her parents noticed a change in her, a newfound sense of purpose and determination that radiated in everything she did. Even her teachers remarked on her improved focus and enthusiasm, praising her for inspiring her classmates with her curiosity and drive. At home, she spent evenings poring over applications for aviation camps and scholarships, her mind set on pursuing a career in piloting. Her bedroom walls, once adorned with model airplanes, now featured posters of famous aviators and astronauts, alongside handwritten notes reminding her to stay brave and focused. One evening, as she gazed out her window at the night sky, she thought about how far she'd come since that fateful flight. From a shy, curious girl with a love for planes to someone who had touched countless lives, she had grown in ways she never anticipated. And yet, she knew this was only the start of her journey. There were still challenges ahead, obstacles to overcome and skies to explore. As she drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of soaring high above the clouds, the wind rushing past her as she navigated uncharted territory. In her dream, she wasn't alone. She was surrounded by others who dared to dream alongside her, each one rising higher than they ever thought possible. For the girl who once wondered if she was brave enough, the future looked brighter than ever. And though she didn't know exactly where her path would lead, one thing was certain: she would continue to aim for the skies, one step or one flight at a time.